Bro, back in my day, you wouldn't believe some of the things we did. In this video, we're talking about things that veterans possibly exaggerate about their time in the service. What's up, my friends? Welcome. So, veterans like to tell their war stories, talk about their time in the service, in the Army, the Marines, whatever the case is. But sometimes, they may not necessarily lie about some things, but maybe exaggerate some things, maybe make things sound cooler, harder, whatever than they actually were. I actually see it sometimes in the comment section down below. I don't know for sure if, the person is telling the truth or exaggerating or whatever, but I often get that impression sometimes with some people, occasionally here and there when they, make a comment about certain things. So let's talk about what some of those things are that I often see veterans kind of exaggerate a little bit on. Some of that is doing cool shit. Sometimes they're like, oh man, I went on this raid and we kicked in some doors and we did this and we did that. Maybe they did sort of, but maybe it wasn't as extreme as they make it sound, or wasn't as action-packed as they try to make it sound. I even have a video that maybe a card pops up about the time that I went on a raid. Personally, I don't really count it. There's some people that say that sure, it counts. Some people say that no, yeah, I agree with you, that doesn't count. But nonetheless, I don't exaggerate about that, right? If you want to see that story about what it was like, definitely, like I said, check out that card, whatever, and check out the video maybe later or whatever. But, I don't exaggerate about that stuff, right? I give you guys the truth, right? No exaggeration here or there. No, I'm trying to make it a little bit cooler than it was. I just give it to you the way it was. But not everybody's like that, right? There are some people that I've even talked to where they, kind of talk about, oh yeah, when I was in Iraq or when I was in Afghanistan, we did this and we did that. And you kind of can sometimes pick up on that and you're like, okay, it sounds like maybe you were on a mission in this location, but you're trying to make it sound like it was like just nuts and everything. And I get the feeling that maybe it wasn't as insane as you're kind of trying to make it sound like it was. I'm not saying all veterans do this. This isn't what I'm trying to say here. Is that sometimes, veterans maybe exaggerate or make it sound more exciting than it really was if you were really there in person. Another one that I even see like in the comments is that, veterans claiming that things were harder back in their day. That's sometimes true, right? There are some cases where, yeah, sometimes it was harder back in those days, or certain aspects of the military were harder, but sometimes they're just, stuck on, it can't be, worse than back in my day, or they hear stories or whatever that maybe are true or maybe false or whatever, and they're like, well, it wasn't like that back in my day. A lot of veterans, claim that, when they served, that it was a different army, it was a different whatever branch of service, and things were a lot tougher. And like I said, there are some cases of that, but probably in general, I don't know if that's, necessarily true. Let's use the example of the Army, right? Because that's what I am. I'm an Army veteran, right? I was in the Army, I still work with the Army and everything like that. And I will say that yes, back in my day, there were certain aspects that were probably harder than today's Army, but there are definitely even some aspects of today's Army that are harder now than they were back in my day. Let's take some examples here of this, for the example of the Army. So something that I will say, in my personal opinion, that was harder back in my day is, the constant deployments, right? You were constantly going on deployments to either Iraq or Afghanistan basically every other year. Either you would go to Iraq for a year, come back for about, 10, 12 months or whatever, and then you'd be back in Iraq again. Currently, right now, there's not really a lot of deployments, so you don't have a lot of units that are doing that, unless you're maybe in the Special Forces or a certain other unit that maybe is deploying rapidly all the time. But your most common, most average soldier has probably, let's say, been in for like 4 or 5 years and never even deployed. During those last several years of me being in the Army, it was very common that you saw everybody pretty much with a combat patch. Now, it's kind of a little bit more rare. It's the only people that are maybe like higher ranking that were in the military or were in the Army during like Operation Iraqi Freedom or Enduring Freedom or whatever. So in my opinion, lifestyle was a little bit harder because you were deploying all the damn time. Now, something that I feel like is harder now compared to when I was in is the physical fitness test. COVID aside though. My physical fitness test, right? You had the push up, the sit up, the 2-mile run. It wasn't easy, but now this 6-event one, a lot of people have controversy about it. Some people may have different opinion than I have, but I feel like that's harder than what I had to do. I had to do 3 events and I was done. Now soldiers have to go through 6 events. You're probably a lot more tired, a lot more pressure on you. There are certain aspects of it where, yeah, it's, maybe the standards are pretty low depending on what kind of MOS you're in, but I feel like nonetheless, that 6-event physical fitness test is harder than the 3-event physical fitness test that I had to do. And there may be even some old school people that are like, well, back in my day, I had to do a physical fitness test in boots and a uniform and everything. Probably the uniform makes it tough, but the actual physical fitness test that they had to do wasn't much different than what I had to go through, or much harder than certain other events that they would have to do for physical fitness tests currently. Soldiers have so much damn free time nowadays, man. Back in my day, we were working late at night, getting up early in the morning. You had no free time. That's another thing I kind of sometimes hear from some veterans. Look, there are times in the Army where, yes, you are spending late nights in the motor pool, late nights doing, a field problem or whatever the case is, and then you have to be back early in the morning. But that's not always the case. Sometimes people just focus so much on those several times or few times or whatever the case was that they did work late, and they make it sound like that was their entire military career. I'll say I probably had, a good kind of mixture of both. I don't know if it's like 50-50 or what the kind of percentage would be of late nights compared to like early days, because sometimes there are days when, hell, I got off like at lunchtime and I basically just had a half day. There's probably not a lot of people, if any people, that served in their time in the military and they had like just consistently through their Army career or their Marine career, whatever the case was, where they're always just working late hours and all that stuff. Unless you're in some kind of, special operations, maybe you have that kind of situation, or certain other, smaller cases. But for the most part, no. I mean, you probably have a good combination of some late nights, some early days, and whatever, but don't buy into this, it was always, late at night and early in the mornings and I barely got any sleep and I don't even know what it was like to have some free time, and I never even saw my family for years. It's a pretty common thing that I usually see some veterans, a little bit exaggerate about is how much free time they had, and they kind of make it sound like they didn't have really any free time ever for their entire military career. That wouldn't happen back in my day. Soldiers had a lot more discipline than today's Army. Thinking that, your soldiers back then were perfect and they couldn't do any wrong and they were always disciplined and showed respect. There's history of soldiers here and there that have done horrible things and gotten kicked out of the military, gotten arrested or whatever, and that hasn't changed even in today's Army, right? Or today's military for that matter. There may be certain key things, right, that the specific branch of the military was more stricter on than maybe today's military is on certain aspects, but in general, I don't think that, soldiers back then were more disciplined than soldiers back, in current day. Are there soldiers nowadays that are less disciplined than soldiers back then? Sure, but there's also soldiers back then that are less disciplined than soldiers that are in the Army now or in the military. So that's definitely like come and go kind of a thing, right? Sure, there may have been more discipline like in like initial training, right? It was pretty strict, right? In basic training back in like the 80s or even the 70s or whatever, and you could potentially get your ass beat by drill sergeants back then. That's not something that exists in modern day basic training or initial training, or not supposed to be a thing, right? So there are probably pieces here and there where sure there was more discipline being instilled in that service member compared to now, but as a whole, no. But I'm also not saying that soldiers nowadays are more disciplined than soldiers were back then. I think it's just you have a wide variety and wide mix of soldiers, from both then and now. Some that are really disciplined back then and really disciplined now, but also some back then that were horrible, dirtbags, and also current day, service members that are current day dirtbags. Now, veterans definitely have certain kind of quirks, certain habits that they're basically stuck with for pretty much the rest of their life after they get out of the military. If you'd like to see what some of those quirks kind of are, check out this video right here. If you haven't seen my latest upload, my recent video, I got it right here, conveniently located to check it out. Check out my links down in the description box down below for Instagram. Follow me on Instagram. Check out my links, all that fun stuff. I'm ThatChrisChaos. Thanks for sticking around. I'll see you next time. See ya.